apologies in advance, folks, if we don't notice your message. There's a good number here now already. We had nearly 250 registrations for this. So you might be watching this as a recording. We are recording, so you can get access to that afterwards. We'll be together for about 45 minutes tops. We'll go through things fairly swiftly. Clearly, we're talking about a hot topic in education. I was talking to Claudia earlier about that, and said, well, actually, it's not a hot topic today. It's always been a hot topic. I qualified as a secondary teacher in 1992. Lots of conversational experience between then and now, and it's still a hot topic, and it's still a hot topic in any form of leadership. Without further ado, I'm going to just jump right in because I'll just stand here and ramble, won't I, Claudia? You know me well. I'm Chris Monroe. I'm GCI Executive Director. We're welcoming people from every state of Australia that I'm still going to say this evening because it's ticked over 5 o'clock, late this afternoon here. We've got people from New Zealand, from the UK. I know England and Scotland are represented there. I didn't check for Wales, my apologies. Ireland, Belgium, China, Thailand, Andorra, Pakistan, and the Philippines. So far, we'll see who else drops in as we go. So thank you, a properly international audience. Hello from London, Lee. Thank you. So I'm going to try not to be distracted by the chat messages popping up, Claudia. I'm going to jump in, first of all, just with a bit of an acknowledgement, as is customary here in Australia. I'm just going to share a few slides with you. So here we go. So I just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. I'm coming to you from the Yarra Valley, just an hour or so outside Melbourne on Wurundjeri land. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people with us here on the call, and any First Nations people elsewhere in the world who are joining us on this call. Claudia, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and your role before we jump right in properly? Yeah.
Sure. So I have a dual role. As you can see, we've got some co-branding on our background. So I am the Director of Learning and Development globally for ICGCI, and I'm also the Director of Sales and Consultancy in North America. I've been with GCI for 13 years and a Director for 7 of those years. And my background is actually in psychology, and I worked in education in and with educators for many years.
A wealth of experience, Claudia. And Claudia and I were responsible for the development, redevelopment of this course just partway through last year. And so what we're going to try and do in this 45 minutes or so is give you a sense of that course, a bit of a flavour of that course. Try not to make it just an infomercial for you. We actually want you to walk away with some insight and knowledge and understanding here. And then we will, at the end of the webinar, do the shameless promotional piece that if you want to know more, there are courses that we run that we can offer to you at certain dates at the end of that as well. So we talked about managing challenging conversations, Claudia, and we really put the emphasis on that word. And we're going to go through just some of the outcomes of the course, some of the key kind of points of the rationale behind the course, and our approach to what it means to manage challenging conversations. Claudia, I know that you've delivered the course most recently of both of us. Just very recently, you delivered this course online to, it might have been our first audience in the US, in North America. It'd be interesting maybe to hear, first of all, just some of the insights that you took from that and some of the key things that resonated about the course with that audience of educators who are facing exactly the same challenges as everyone else elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Chris, that's absolutely right. I think one of the first things I noticed was, regardless of where you are as an educator, and we work with educators globally, educators are facing the same issues. they're facing, shortages, feeling overwhelmed, having to juggle multiple things at once. And one of the things that is common is the conversations you need to have, regardless of where you are placed in the world. This idea of having to manage a challenging conversation or have a challenging conversation is, I think, global. So one of the things that really resonated for the educators that I was working with in North America was the insights they gained about themselves as they were doing this course. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further, like what is it that you're actually managing? And a lot of the times it's yourself. The other thing that came through really clearly was having a little bit of theory and a couple of techniques and tools to underpin these conversations was so helpful for them, because people are like, I have to have these conversations, but I'm not really sure how to start or where to start. So having an understanding of the theory that underpins these conversations was helpful. And secondly, a couple of tools that you could put in your toolkit that you could cherry pick depending on what the situation was. So I think they were the kind of things that emerged.
That's great. It's great to hear, Claudia. I think that's an important thing to emphasize here, and I've said it internally and maybe externally, jokingly. If you're looking for a course, or if you see a book that claims to help you have challenging conversations in 3 easy steps, subtitle is really get people to see the world your way in 3 easy steps. Let us know how that works out for you, because it's more complex than that. We know it's more complex than that. We know that educators do deeply complex relational work. You're in human intensive environments, and that brings both the joy of the work, but it also brings some challenges too. We're dealing with humans. And those human to human interactions, whether it's adult to child or whether it's adult to adult, present those same challenges and the challenge means different things for different people. So the course is very much around how we approach these conversations. And Claudia used a lovely phrase when we were chatting earlier, understand the anatomy of these conversations, and the context within which they sit is half the battle. Yes, there are things you can do, things you can say or not say, things you can manage in the conversation. But that changes, doesn't it? And you've got to be adaptable in the moment. And so the deeper learning from this kind of course is actually self and other, and what's actually happening in the dynamic of that conversation and how we're reading it, along with some techniques. And clearly, we're a coaching organization. We like to think, Claudia, we know a thing or two about conversations. And it's about bringing the techniques and skills and way of being of coaching to these conversational contexts, which are definitely not coaching. But those techniques really, really help us. So, Claudia, I'm going to skip on to the slide about course outcomes and invite you just to give us a rundown of what's in the course, the kind of structure, and that will flag some of the things that it might flag some questions for people. It might have people might have some wonderings or thoughts on that, and then we'll dig into some of the detail under the surface. As I say, folks, we're not doing a 1-day course in 45 minutes, but it's to give you a sense and a flavour of this. Last thing I'll say is to invite you to by all means, use the chat box as a kind of back channel of communication and sharing your thoughts and wonderings with each other. If you've got a specific question you'd like us to answer or try to answer, if you can use the Q&A function, that means they'll be kept nice and orderly for us. And we'll check in on that every now and again. We might have some pause points where we'll stop to answer some questions partway through. We'll certainly allow some time towards the end to tackle those. All right. Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks. So this is a 1-day course, or you can do it in a modularized way. You can do it in person or online. Online, you could do it modularized, so it could be 3 2-hour sessions, or if you were keen, you could do a full day online. But there are a couple of outcomes for this course, and Chris mentioned earlier, it was really, I would say, the 2 key things that you would take away from this course is an increased confidence in being able to lean into these conversations, and some tools and techniques to underpin and support having these conversations in a way that's evidence-based, but still allow you to have nuanced changes to suit You could wordsmith some of these techniques we share with you to suit your context. So we want you to understand what makes a difficult, challenging conversation. And I did use that comment I made to Chris earlier today. Really, this course is about the anatomy of the difficult conversations. What is a difficult conversation? What makes it difficult? And how can you be supported in tackling these conversations to have positive outcomes? The flavor of everything we do is underpinned by a developmental approach. So it's about creating support and empathy for you as leaders to be able to have these conversations in a way that is ethical, but still gets you to the point where you need to go. So as I mentioned earlier, there's theories that underpin this. So if you want to dig deeper, you can. So self-awareness is actually one of the key outcomes of coaching. This is work from Sir John Whitmore. So in this course, well, one of the educators I worked with last week said to me, I actually learned a lot about myself in this course. So a lot of managing the conversation was actually about managing myself in these conversations. And I'm sure you can agree, if you've ever been in a situation where you've had to do that, a lot of the times you're managing multiple things. So we do talk about that, and we'll touch on that later. And confidence and the frameworks and are really underpinning this. But as Chris mentioned earlier, the experience you take, although we don't really go deep into coaching, we do touch on that a little bit and show you some techniques and tools that will support the way you have these conversations with your counterparts.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. I think running through all of these is that idea of a coaching approach. So it's not a coaching training course. You can start here. You don't have to have any coaching training at all. And you'll come out of it listening differently, listening and noticing different things, leading with questions rather than judgment, leading with curiosity. There'll be things that I sometimes talk about dialing things up, dialing things down. So it's quite a reflective experience and a kind of self-awareness raising experience. You still have to manage that interaction with the person on the other side. So we do have to talk about, so what are some frameworks and tools and conversation frames that will help? What are some things you might want to do more of or less of that might help? And very much it's a practical experience of practicing this. This is probably the only course, and I'm going to use this phrase, where there's a bit of role play. And I know, working with educators myself as well, as soon as I hear the word role play in a workshop, I cringe and want to crawl under the desk. You can't really bring the people to the course that you want to have the challenging conversation with. So you need to practice on each other. And we know that we act our way into learning rather than the other way around. So this in particular, because we put these courses off, we put these conversations off, and we skirt around them, and we wait until they build up to the point where often we don't show up at our best, we don't manage it very well, and it doesn't have the outcomes that we want it to have, or it damages relationships. You've got a safe space in a training workshop with us to practice with people who are trying to do the same, with scenarios that you bring to the table, and actually using those real life examples. So we sometimes talk about real play rather than role play. We want you talking about the real things. Yeah. Claudia, anything else you want to add about those outcomes before we have a look at the actual course?
The only one thing I would say is, as a result of coming for that day, and bringing your real life examples with you and thinking about them and thinking about how you're going to apply them, as a result of doing the course, you'll have immediately implementable techniques that you can use in your context. There will be something that you will take that will allow you to either look at a conversation in a different way, approach a conversation in a different way, or actually have the confidence to have the conversation and follow it up.
Yep. And I think it's the difference between confidence and intention. You could leave a really good PD all fired up, going, right, I'm going to go and have the conversation with Claudia. I know I've got to have that conversation. This course has helped me. But confidence is something more than that. Confidence is knowing I've thought about how I'm going to initiate it. I've thought about how it's likely to land with Claudia. I've thought about some of the background conditions here. I've thought about myself and my use of language. And I've got a notion of how I can confidently show up and manage that conversation, and confidence that I can get it to somewhere constructive that I might not have had before. So it's going beyond that good intention to having the skills and techniques and kind of wherewithal to actually manage these in ways that still still maintain high expectations and seek alignment between us, because that's often where the point of tension comes, but do that in a way that maintains relationships. So in terms of where we start with your challenging conversation scenarios. We don't give you them. We've got plenty of our own as experienced educators, but those are ours from our conversational experience. So beginning to think, and as we're going through this just now, I'd invite you to reflect. You might comment, you might ask a question on what your responses would be to these questions. So when you imagine these challenging conversation scenarios, who are they with? I don't mean the one you've got to have tomorrow. That might be the one that's on your mind just now. But who are they typically with? And you might say everyone, but when you start to think about the actual relationships with those different people and the different nature of those relationships, we start to get towards what it is that makes them feel challenging. What are they about? Clearly, there are some topics that are more contentious than others. So what kinds of topics require these kinds of conversations? The contexts for these conversations. When and where do they occur? Sometimes they're unplanned and impromptu. In the more challenging situations, they hopefully are more planned and thought through in advance. But even the context where you choose to have the conversation can have a bearing on the dynamic of that, or the anatomy, as Claudia has said. And then all the way through the design of this and the way we lead our professional learning is with a solution-focused stance. And so rather than just ruminate and have a good whinge about all these scenarios and all these difficult people we've all got to work with, there's a catharsis in that. What's the difference that you'll see if you had those conversations and you managed them well? What difference would that make? And what else? And what else would that do for you, for them? What would that get you? What would be the benefit of that to you, to the school, to the students, to the children, to your colleagues, to the team? And by taking that coaching approach right now, as I'm illustrating here, to help you uncover and go to that level of detail of what it is you want to be different here, you begin to see those conversations as, hopefully, as less adversarial and more emotionally compelling to you. But when you're able to convey those benefits of resolving this situation to your conversation partner in that moment, that change becomes more emotionally compelling to them as well. So all the way through this, we're modeling in the way we ask you to think as leaders, or as conversation leaders. If you're not in a designated position, you're leading these conversations, to start to think about, so what's the compelling case for change here? What difference will having this conversation make? We could take a deficit approach and say, well, what have you got to lose if you don't have the conversation? Sometimes you need that challenge to say, no, I really need to have it. But I think most educators know when they reach that point where there has to be a conversation here about this. So thinking about the scenario, thinking about the context, and then thinking about what the benefits will be from a whole range of lenses is very much a coaching approach. Yeah. And again, remember as we go here, if you've got thoughts or comments or questions as we're going, by all means, post those. So that starting point is, what are the scenarios? What's the context that we're bringing to this? Who are they with? And we start to map that out. But then importantly, envisioning what we would like these conversations to look like and what we would like them to, what the outcomes thereafter would be. Claudia, anything you want to add to that?
I just think what's really important, what I've noticed when I've been delivering this course, is the reasons why people avoid these conversations. And I mean, and this comes out in the literature as well. And we avoid these conversations for multiple reasons. Either we're not prepared, we might have had a bad experience in the past where either we've been given feedback or had a conversation with someone that hasn't gone well. We haven't had it modeled to us well, so we don't know how to lean into these conversations, or we don't have a good relationship sometimes, or we've had a past poor experience with individuals, so we tend to avoid them. So I think the benefit question is really important, because I look at this in two ways. Well, what's the benefit of having this conversation, not just for the other person, but for yourself as a leader? You know, it could be around credibility. It could be around even just building your own confidence. It could be around building a relationship with that other person, because often by not having the conversation or not having it in a way that's well or prepared can actually be more of a drawback to you in your role through that avoidance. And I think we've got a couple of
Yep.
questions here. If you don't mind, we might
Yeah,
just
go on,
pause.
go
One
on,
from
jump
Daniel.
in.
He
I'm going to
said,
stop sharing this for a
yeah,
minute. Go on.
yeah. So one from Daniel, he said, will the course be available to teachers in the UK? Yes. If so, we in person, we have a consultant who lives in Northern Ireland, so it can be online
Yep.
or in person. And we can give you some more details, Daniel, if you'd like that.
Oh, hello,
And
Dan. I've just realised who Dan is.
yeah,
Yes, Dan
Dan.
knows our work well. Yes, so
Yeah.
yeah, nice to see you
And we
here.
have someone, they haven't put their name here, but how can you approach these conversations with someone who is your boss?
Yeah,
Great question. So actually in the course, there's a whole section of the course. I'm not sure of your
little
name because
bit.
it's just come up at
Yeah.
autonomous. There's a little part of the course where we talk about power dynamics and managing upwards, having these conversations with a peer
Yeah.
or a colleague, and then as a leader having that conversation. So we do
Yeah,
look at
yeah,
techniques
yeah.
for
And
that.
we can answer that just a little bit there. It's yeah, because you can ask, and there, it's one of my colleagues likes to call it speaking truth to power. You know, what kicks in there is power and status, whether we want it to or not. So when it's your boss, you know, and so often it's because you're not getting what you need to do your job well. You know, and we've all been in that position at different times. In some ways, that's really challenging. It's really challenging because you're speaking to that power and status as well. Um, as I said at the start, I can't say, well, here's how to do it. Here's the easy steps. So one of the things is actually having the sentence stems and the awareness raising information to give to your boss. You know, when and certain choice of language. When you do this, you know, it's great that we make time for check-ins, Claudia, you know, and that you're giving me some of your time each week. What would make it even better for me is if we could keep those conversations on track and I was able to give you agenda items in advance, because that would allow me to resolve the issues that I'm bringing to the table. Sometimes we don't get to them. How does that sound to you? You know, and so it obviously depends on your relationship, but there's awareness raising information that you want to let them know what it's like on the other side of them. Now, clearly that might be a procedural thing, but if it's a personality thing, it starts to become a bit more sensitive again, doesn't it? So there's a continuum of seriousness, if you like, here that requires different kinds of thinking and approaches
Yeah.
and language as we go. I can say more about that a wee bit later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think
Carla.
maybe
Yeah.
a slide that'll come up. We'll talk about triggers,
I'll
which
talk a little
might
bit to
answer
that. Yeah.
some. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
as maybe you're bringing the slides back up, Carlo,
Sure.
you said who presents the course in person, or is it you? Myself and Chris do present, but we have consultants globally,
Yeah, most of our
and they
consultants.
can either do it. Yeah, they can do it in person, depending on where you're located, or online, virtually. And Anita's just said that's a great question. Managing up the
Thank you.
power differential in a very busy workplace. It is challenging, Anita. We do actually tackle that in the course, and we speak about the importance, first of all, of understanding. And this is where this question comes in. What are you actually managing?
Mm.
And this was a very, very pivotal moment for me as we were doing the research to bring this course together. And then when I've been working with educators, because often what we're managing is ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Next
often
slide.
we think, I'm managing a challenging conversation. It can be ourselves that we're managing. It can be the narrative we have, our own anxiety, our own fear about what if I have the conversation and it doesn't go well, will that impact my relationship or my role? All of these things that are on the screen. It could be I'm trying to manage something that I believe and hold dear and true, and the person I'm having to have the conversation with may not have that same belief system. You're also then managing other. You can be managing the other person's narrative. You're trying to manage expectations. It could be, as we pointed out earlier, power or status. It could be a relationship that you're trying to manage. It could be somebody you're close with that you need to have the conversation with. It could be a colleague. It could be a parent. It could be a leader. It could be a team member. Psychological safety, voice. There's a whole lot of interpersonal issues. And then the last one is organizationally. You could be trying to manage multiple things. It could be a policy and procedure. It could be part of the organizational culture. There could be history or legacy that's just been passed down to you as a leader or a team member. Psychological safety comes up a lot. So in the course, we unpack this in more detail to be able to help you understand what it is you're trying to manage. Because once you can identify what it is you're trying to manage, you are able to manage that in a more effective way. And sometimes, as Chris kind of mentioned earlier on, you still might have you still might be managing that anxiety that you have inside you or that fear of having that conversation. But what hopefully this course will do is allow you to identify what are your blockers in having this conversation. So you're able to have it in a more organized and authentic way. And you still might feel the things that you're feeling, but once you can identify this is a whole awareness piece. Comes back to emotional intelligence. When you can identify and aware what it is you're managing, you are able to manage it more effectively.
Yeah. I think, Claudia, that's a great overview. There's a lot on that slide, underneath that slide, but I
Yeah,
think
there
to
is.
separate the factors out into your internal, what you're bringing to this, and you can't set them aside. You can't empty your head. You can't not have your past experience and baggage that you bring with it, and that can be positive and negative. And then it's that interpersonal piece where the other person's, attitudes, level of trust with you, relationship with you, all those things, power and status, that example we had there. And then if we think about the organizational piece there, you might have no control or influence over that depending on your role in the organization. If you're the senior leader or one of the senior leaders, you have more influence on those things. And here I would kind of refer to Stephen Covey's kind of famous work, of sphere of influence or circle of influence. Circle of influence, and the things that you've got control over. So that in these conversations, you might not be able to change the organizational culture. You're having this conversation within the organizational culture. Your immediate circle of control, as Covey would say, is yourself. How you respond, how you react, what you say, what you do. You have some influence over the interpersonal relationship and how the conversation plays out because you're initiating it and leading it and managing it. And depending on your role, depending on your position in the organization, you may or may not have that influence over the organizational side. And Stephen Covey would call that the circle of concern. You've got little control over it unless you're the key decision maker there. But what we're putting that column there for is because these things, the backdrop to the conversation, is always going to have some influence on the starting point and the nature of the conversation as it unfolds, and maybe even the outcomes of the conversation. So it's a messy space, and what we're trying to do is help raise awareness and help that sense-making process, but then get down to some details and say, okay, with all that given, let's have a go. How do you actually address these things from fairly straightforward, I'm concerned that this keeps happening, your reports are late, things like that, through to what one of our lovely colleagues calls the mad, bad, and dangerous stuff, the things that are quite clear malpractice, unprofessional behavior, which are the smallest proportion. They really are the most anxiety inducing, but the smallest proportion of conversations in schools. There's a whole group there that are not quite as serious as that. They don't need a formal performance management process, but they do need to be addressed, or they become a much, much bigger issue. And that's the space where we go in this course. Briefly, some of you will have seen this continuum slide before, where I've talked about a continuum of professional conversations from completely cathartic, empathetic listening, non-directive end, through a professional learning conversation phase in the middle, coaching, mentoring, other forms of conversation in there, where people are readily wanting to change something. And then this course sits right at that boundary between the serious, pointy, mad, bad, and dangerous stuff at the end, where there's performance concerns, duty of care, risk management, compliance, and so on, called different things in different jurisdictions. But the ones that sometimes are most challenging for us are the ones that aren't really clear cut. They're just on that boundary of this person doesn't seem to see what's happening here, or they don't seem to see the impact of this. And it's often concerns about consistency, about alignment, about shared expectations, about communication, about relationships. And it might not be to the point where you don't want it to get to the point where it's a serious performance concern. But if you don't have the conversation in a timely manner, And in a constructive manner, it might become one of those. So it's that space, and that red bit in the end is a continuum as well. There are different degrees of severity there. So naming that up front and saying, right, let's talk about some of the kinds of scenarios that go in there. And in most of your systems and jurisdictions, there are processes that are enacted for the really serious things. And mostly the bad news is that comes with being a principal or a head teacher or administrator in a school as well. So that tends to help people narrow down kind of where these conversations sit. And the other key phrase on there, Claudia, that we love is from Paul Jackson and Mark McCargo, solution-focused experts and thought leaders, that we want people to be customers for change. But in these conversations, they don't often start as customers for change, but we're hoping that through the conversation, we get them there. They see the need for change, they see the need, and they're willing to do something about it. And with your support from this conversation. So these lead to coaching or lead to more supportive conversations when they go well.
So before you go to the next slide,
sure.
as you might go to the next slide, but there's another question here. What's the biggest impact you've already seen from people doing or experiencing this course? Thank you. That's a really great question. I would say from my experience in doing delivering this course, the feedback I've received from participants has been clarity about what is it I need to navigate, first of all. So once they identify what it is they need to navigate, the second part is how can I navigate it? What are the tools that can help me get to where I want to get? And the third one is how do I need to either communicate this effectively? Who do I need to support me in doing this? Sometimes it could be nobody, or it could be a few people. And then the other one is after having these conversations, what's next? What is the consistency or follow-up that's needed? But the biggest thing that comes out, I would say, is clarity around what's needed and how do I need to do it. So thank you for asking that question.
Claudia. I think it might sound fuzzy to say sense making, but actually having a space separate from school to make sense of these scenarios. You might be reading it as resistant behavior. You might be reading it as someone who's just difficult to work with as you come in. And by the time people leave, I don't mean relationships are transformed and that person becomes a different human being. We have difficult people in our lives, but you see the scenario differently. And I think it's that spring in your step that there's a point in the course where it can feel a bit heavy because we're talking about all the negative stuff. What we want is to get you to that point where you feel as though you can act. You can act on these conversations, and you've got some skills and techniques to. So there's a bit of a spring as you go out the door that now that needs to be had, and I can have it in a clear, unambiguous way, and I can still maintain the relationship with that person. The bit you can't control and we can't control is what happens on the other side of it, but it's giving it its best chance of making an impact. That's what we want.
Chris, I just want to pick up on a point you said about sense making. The beginning of the course, in the first part of the course, we spend a bit of time in that. And that I think is very transformational because if we can psychologically, we can make sense of things, the way we approach the conversation and our mindset can be completely transformational. And so rather than looking at this person as someone who is difficult, who's challenging, who's a blocker, all of a sudden now I see somebody who maybe is struggling, whose maybe expectations are misaligned. Then I start to also reflect myself. Have I communicated properly? Have I been clear in what's expected? Have I followed up? Have I offered support? So there's a lot of questions that emerge for you as a participant to really reflect on and make sense of things. And I feel you come out of this course being more curious and less judgmental, and which actually helps your position then to have these conversations.
Definitely, Claudia. I'm not going to use any more of the content slides actually, because I'll just get one last. There's a couple more good questions there. Carlo, thank you. Yes, we do. One of the things we pride ourselves on is we don't like to do one and done PD where we just parachute in and jump out again. Clearly, we're getting people started on this. This is a work in progress. You need to practice these techniques and skills. They don't always go well. And equally, you can ask our partners and family, Claudia, they don't always get the best of us. You might think because we're trained coaches and we do this stuff that our conversations are all perfect. No, sorry, we're human as well. So sometimes we show up a bit grouchy at times as well. So I think, that follow-up support can be in the form of consultancy. One of the things we see in this course is if this is your starting point, it kind of sows the seeds of ooh, I might want to learn more about those coaching skills. If this is their first entry point, you might then want to come and do some training, or we come to you and do some proper skill development on the coaching techniques then as well. And that kind of leads into hi Glenda, nice to see you, a former connection from Scotland as well. Now very much a Kiwi. Nice to see you here, Glenda. Yeah, do you explicitly make clear that you're having a coaching conversation and call it such with the person you're conversing with? My straight answer to that is no, because it's not a coaching conversation.
Mm.
Until that point, where if I'm having that conversation with Claudia, Claudia goes, oh, that's right. I wish I could get on top of that. And I shouldn't have spoken like that in the meeting. I can see your point. That's that turning point where the person is more aware of what the issue is. They are at the point of acceptance that there is an issue, and they're showing signs of being willing to do something about it. At that point, when you flip the conversation to, so what would better or different look like? What could we work on together as a goal that will, or you rephrase it as a goal for them and say, should we work on that together? At that point, it becomes coaching. Me sharing unambiguous information with you about how I experienced you in a meeting, or why it's an issue for the team that your reports are late again, is not a coaching conversation. It's a very directive conversation where I'm trying to be clear and I'm trying to raise your awareness by presenting you with some information that gives you a different perspective. That can have to loop round a few times sometimes before you get to that point where they go,
Yeah.
that's the coaching point. But to call this a coaching conversation from the start, Glenda, would be dangerous actually, because you misrepresent coaching as
Yes.
a way of fixing people or as a feedback conversation. It's a catalyst for a coaching conversation when it works best, I think. Yeah.
And if you don't have acceptance, as you've said, Chris, it might be a different conversation. But
Yep.
I think one of the biggest things that we talk about in the course is being prepared in these conversations.
Mm,
This is often a reason why people don't have good outcomes. They go into the conversation not really clear about what is the outcome that I want. You need to
yeah.
start with the end in
Yeah.
mind, and you need
Yeah.
to go in prepared, and you need
Yeah.
to have an anchor point
Yeah.
in the conversation, whether it's a policy document, whether it's something that was in a meeting. There needs to be a third point. We talk about third point in these conversations, which is the data. So what
Mm,
is it, is it around performance? Is it around whatever the conversation is around? I need to have an anchor point that I can go back to be able to reference to support the dialogue that I'm having with you in the feedback that I'm
yeah.
giving you.
I
And
th
there's another,
it's a great question. I'll get to that question. I just want to say one more thing about
Mm,
that as well. That if you try to be coach in these conversations where you've got a genuine concern, another way of describing these is concern-based conversations. These are conversations where you're concerned about something you've seen, or you've seen or witnessed for yourself, or it's come from the parents, or it's come from the students, it's come from a colleague in the team. To go in and pretend that's a coaching or try to be coach-like, you're likely to ask lots of leading questions and drop lots of hints. And you're really manipulating in that conversation then, if we're really honest. So it's presenting the information, it's trying to raise the awareness, and then once you get them to that point of being a customer for change, that then is when coaching kicks off. Even if you're the leader, you don't need to refer them to the coach down the corridor. You can then support them with a proper coaching conversation. Yeah. And Anita's got a question there. Is that the one you were looking at, Claudia?
yeah, is the
Yeah.
information this core part of
That's Is that the
midday
Bangkok one?
coaching?
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think that's the Bangkok one that Anita might be referring to. So I'm doing a
uh,
special because we don't have a
mhm,
3-day course on this, but the if that's the Bangkok course, I'm doing a 3-day special where I'm doing
yes.
2 days of introduction to leadership coaching, and I'm putting this course on the end of it and putting them together as a seamless pathway. So if that's the one you mean, Anita, yes, absolutely. That's your third day stitched into having done the coaching skills piece, or it stands alone as a 1 day. If you mean our coaching and leadership course, that's the bigger course. This is convincing us we need to get the names right, Claudia.
Yep. Yep.
Um, then we get to the point of learning-based conversations, those ones where you're nudging and stretching the practice of people, but we save challenging conversations for a separate course as well. So it can
Yep.
dovetail with our coaching and leadership course too. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions in the last 5 minutes? I've got some information to share with you, but that was basically what we wanted to share with you. And 80 people have hung in there with us, or they've all just been tag teaming in and out of the call, Claudia. I hope that's been of use and of interest to everyone. It gives you just a sense of how we're choosing to approach this course. There's a whole body of literature out there that we draw on, and invariably it'll be called How to Have Hard Conversations, Challenging Conversations, Concern-Based Conversations. If you go to Susan Scott's work, she talks about fierce conversations. I think back to a participant in one of our courses, Claudia, a really respected colleague in school in New South Wales. And she said to me once in a workshop, I don't believe in challenging conversations. And I went, oh, is that a belief? And she went, nah, she said, I don't believe they have to be challenging. I
Mm.
think when you really delve into it, what it is that's making it challenging and how you approach these, you can actually learn how to take down the level of challenge in those conversations for yourself. How you get that
Yes.
message to land with the other person that doesn't trigger all
Yeah.
sorts of things is the other half of that
Yeah.
equation.
I think half of the issue is often managing yourself. And Georgina's going to put a couple of links into the chat. There's an article and there's a curious conversation that might be worth watching if you're interested. It's
Yep.
with one of the authors who we quote, Ellie Drago-Severson, and it's about developmental feedback. So while
Yep.
Georgina's putting a couple of those links in, we want to let you know of where you might be able to join us in the upcoming months.
So there's a big list here, and these are what we call open enrollment courses. So these are on our website now. You can go on and sign up. The New Zealand ones might not be on our website yet until tomorrow, but they are on our partner organization in New Zealand. But we'll get those up there soon. As I've said, I'm doing a 3-day thing in Bangkok that's got those two courses together. I'm doing a 1-day special before EdFest in Shanghai in April. And then we've got Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, and Canberra in Australia, and an online cohort in this. If you're anywhere else in the world, we can do that as well. The other thing to say is we come to you. Most of what our
Yes.
consultants do is actually out in schools and networks of schools. So Dan in Glasgow, for example, there's no reason why we can't form a cohort if there's demand from this at a UK-friendly time zone. If there are people in the Middle East who want this, we can do that at the time zone as well. And we're running it in North America as well. It does work quite well online. You might still think, oh, from COVID, don't make me go online again. But actually, as an interactive experience, using breakout rooms properly and so on, it does still work. And we can chunk it into those 3 2-hour sessions, as Claudia mentioned earlier. So don't be put off by that one if the geographic locations or dates don't work for you as well. But certainly in-house, coming to your school, doing this with a group of your leaders or with your whole staff is always a possibility as well. And it's just a matter of contacting us for information on that as well. So that's where we're going from this base in our near regions. And as Claudia's mentioned earlier, North America, UK, everywhere in between as well. We're trying to make this work available all around the world.
I just wanted to quickly answer. Carlo put a question in there.
Thank
He's
you.
done a course with Sophie on mentoring. They're completely different, Carlo. They're not the same course, and there's not really any crossover. They're dealing with two completely different topics. So
if anything, the mentoring course will set you up with some of the skills to
that's right.
make even
Yeah.
more success of this. Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you all.
Yep.
And I'll put my email address in the chat box as well if anybody needs to reach out.
Sure. And you've got all of our contact details there. And if you don't already subscribe or you didn't say that in your registration, then there's a QR code there as well. And I think we'll share most of these slides afterwards as well with the recording if you want to have a look at those. There's no major trade secrets or anything on there as well. And we hope to see you on one of the courses soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.